Welcome everyone to our Business Resiliency Task Force weekly webinar. The Grand Prairie Chamber of Commerce is so pleased to be working with the County of Grand Prairie and the City of Grand Prairie and just trying to figure this whole COVID thing out. We've got our website set up on the Chamber website with links to information and available programs. We have the Love Local GP campaign running on Facebook. And I really appreciate everybody's participation in that. We've been giving away a number of chamber checks to folks that have been sharing their love for local business, and we hope that continues. We have the Business Advisory Voucher Program with Community Futures from Grand Prairie and Region. And actually that program has become so popular that we're into a little bit of a waiting list situation at the moment, but we will keep working on that and trying to help local businesses adapt to the current situation. And it kind of fits in nicely with what we'll be talking about today about adapting and that sort of thing. But we do want to mention that our next webinar is Friday, May 8th. And that will be featuring Kari Speaker-Smith and the team from Fletcher Mudrick LLP. And they'll be providing some answers to some of their most frequently asked questions regarding available financial programs and that sort of thing for businesses. So today's session is being recorded so we can share it later. And folks that weren't unable to attend, they can catch up and find out all the great information that Ryan and Richard from 910 are going to be sharing here shortly. We do have the chat function. If you are new to Zoom, just at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat button and a window will open up and you can ask questions in there or indicate that maybe you have a question that is a little longer or detailed and maybe we can unmute your mic and let you have the floor a little bit and fire your question directly to Ryan and Richard. I've mentioned them a couple times. So I guess I should formally introduce Ryan Blais and Richard Podsada from 910 Incorporated, valued members of our Chamber of Commerce, and very busy right now and have been even maybe even more so than usual in some aspects. But we're so pleased that they were able to join us today. Ryan and Richard, I'll let you take it away, and as we go, we will do some questions and answers, and I know you have some great slides and information to share. So the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. Richard, I'll throw it over to you for a quick intro, and then maybe I'll take it from there and start guiding the discussion all about all things e-commerce.
Okay, sure. So hi, I'm Richard Podsada. I'm actually one of the owners of 910 Incorporated, and I'm more the geek technical arm. I head most of the website division and a lot of the digital marketing that relates to websites too, like Google, SEO, SEM, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's my main role at the company. And when we do have an e-commerce project, that's something that I'm quite involved in as well in terms of figuring out the technology and how do we get all these products in there and all that kind of stuff. So over to you, Ryan.
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Ryan Blais. I'm one of the partners along with Richard and Chris. Sapola is one of the partners as well, who, of course, Tom, you'd be very familiar with just through the community and her work with Chamber over the years. But a quick overview of 910. So we're a local firm, and we sort of have three silos that we focus on. One is brand. So that's logos, visual identity, brand standards, graphic design, all that kind of stuff. And then the middle column is all things web. So that's web, social media, search primarily. And then the last column is digital activation, which is sort of paid promotion of your business products and services, which sort of ties into the thing we're going to be talking about today, which is e-commerce, which is, of course, the idea of having a website that's going to allow you to sell your products and services online. So not necessarily bound by your physical location and bricks and mortar. Of course, with e-commerce, you have the ability to sell your products outside of your physical region. So that's a very good opportunity for a lot of businesses traditionally. And now with COVID-19, there's a lot of businesses that are having to use the buzzword pivot, right? Which is to say, we have to figure something out differently here because now is the time for us to learn how to take the step into digital. And for many, that might be for the first time they're getting a website, and maybe they're next looking into, can this website also take the next step and start selling? So that would be e-commerce. And the goal of today a little bit is to have a conversation about what it takes to get online. And so we 7 steps to selling online. There's no magical 7 steps. We could easily pull that into 10 steps or condense it into 4 steps. But the intent here is to guide a discussion and to help everyone understand what it means to take that step into online commerce, and also provide some guidance. And we'll go through some examples today, but people who are watching this should leave the conversation feeling that they have a good understanding of what e-commerce is and whether or not they're capable to roll up their sleeves and take a swing at it and do it themselves. So we'll show 3 examples from the spectrum where 910 did this on behalf of a client. It's very polished, it's very professional. And we have examples on the other side of the spectrum where our clients have rolled up the sleeves and they've done it completely on their own. And I recommend sort of both options. It's not as though you have to work with an agency, but what you have to do is be prepared and you have to be ready to do the work. It's very much real work to jump into e-commerce. So I'll quickly outline the 7 steps, and then we'll kind of geek out about those and try to have some conversation along the way. So the first step is actually just planning. It's the unsexy thing where it's 80% planning and then 20% doing. And most of the time when we're talking to clients, they actually haven't done the adequate planning. So we always start with a planning phase and get everything ready before we take the next step. And so we'll get into detail about that. Number 2 is actually creating your account on the e-commerce platform, whether that's Shopify or Wix or WooCommerce or BigCommerce, or there's plenty of platforms out there. We'll talk mostly about Shopify today, which is the #1 e-commerce platform in the world. It happens to be Canadian. They have great human level support as well. So when you create the account, still in sort of step 2, you have to configure it. We'll get into that a little bit. Then step number 3 is gathering and organizing and creating your content. So this is the words, the pictures, the videos that are going to go on your website. And specifically, it's the products that you're going to be having to upload into your system. So it's your SKUs. Then the next step, depending on your platform, is configuring like aesthetic configurations. And so in Shopify land, this is called sometimes licensing themes to make your website look a certain way and have certain cool functionality. And it's the sort of customization of dropping in what are called apps, which add extra functionality to your website. Then we get to step 5, which is unsexy, and no one wants to do it, but you should do it, and it's test, test, test. Is do fake transactions, do real transactions, have customers go through it. This is sort of the idea of like the soft launch, get some transaction going. When you get an order, what happens next offline in terms of the fulfillment? Step 6 is where everyone gets excited, which is launch, and that means go live to the world. And then this is also traditionally where things fall flat, because people are thinking of the movie with Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams, where if you build it, they will come. And that only happens with Kevin Costner. So when you launch a website, you have to be ready to actively promote it. And there's lots of ways to do that, from digital to traditional to word of mouth to telling people on email to posting it on social media, all of that sort of stuff. So Richard, I'm going to throw it over to you. I remember when I first joined 910, this is 7 years ago or so, one of the first blogs I read from you was a cautionary tale about, you think you're ready to go online selling with e-commerce, think again. And it wasn't meant to discourage, but rather was meant to help people plan of what they need to do to be ready to jump into e-commerce. Can you talk a little bit about the planning side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things that I've seen over the years is when like customers come to us and they're like, hey, I want to sell my widgets online, whatever that is. The biggest thing that I find is that they're only really thinking about just getting the website built, because it feels like, okay, I just need to get this website online and people will just magically buy from me. And you know what? It's not that easy. And the article I wrote was really to say, here's all the things that you need to consider to see if you're actually really ready for this. Because to be honest with you, building the actual website for e-commerce, and especially with things like Shopify these days, is almost the easiest part. The hard part is the strategy. For example, what am I going to sell online? For example, if you're a retailer and you carry multiple brands, some of those brands might not let you sell things online. Like, you might not have the authorization to. It might also be, and also considerations like, for example, inventory. how are you going to manage your inventory? So let's say you're selling over the counter and you're selling online. I mean, with COVID, you're not really maybe doing the counter sales, or maybe you will be soon. We'll see. But how do you manage the inventory between those two things? And a lot of the considerations in terms of how much time it actually takes to build out your catalog, because those products don't just magically appear on your website. You need to take a photo of them or get photos of them. Usually, if you're in retail, usually the brands will provide most of this information for you. You can save a lot of time. But like writing descriptions about them, putting in all the information, the pricing, also things that people don't think about is the shipping. Okay, so with a retail store, it's very easy, because if I buy a shoe off of you, the attendant basically puts it in a box and hands it over to you, and transaction's done. You get your bag, you walk out, you smile, you say thank you, and it's done. But with e-commerce, it's not done there, because now you have to get that product to the customer, and that means shipping it, that means packaging it, that means possibly charging for that shipping and or that packing, and making sure your margins still work there. So you have this whole extra step and cost to deliver that to the customer, and maybe not even just deliver it, but also wow them in some way, like put in a little handwritten note in there or something like that. So there's just a lot of steps there that people don't think about, because for example, when you're building your catalog on Shopify, one of the things you might actually have to do is measure the boxes that you're shipping stuff in and weigh them in advance, so you can put that information in so it can calculate your shipping costs.
Richard, I just wanted to jump in there real quickly about because you're getting into some detail here that I want to outline in some of the other steps. But the key point about planning is, one of the things that we'll do as a professional sort of agency is we'll help to map out at the beginning some of the main considerations. And really, it's what it is. It's a list of homework for the client to go and prepare. So it's gathering up the photos, it's getting the descriptions written, it's talking about, where are we going to be selling to? Is it just the Peace region that we're going to be shipping to? What about all of Alberta? Can people buy from Saskatchewan and BC? What about into the States? How are we going to be calculating all of the sort of the tax differences across provinces? For the most part, the platforms help you do that at the configuration stage. And then, part of the planning also is a realistic discussion about, once this website's built, what are your hopes? Are you just going to sort of do as Kevin Costner did and build it and hope people will come? And so we try to make sure that there's an activation plan in place. So, quite often I use the term, we will help back our clients off of a cliff and help them to realize that they're not quite ready for e-commerce. And that's not to discourage people about e-commerce, but again, it's about being prepared. So if you've never launched a website yet, and you're sort of new to social media, and you've never admitted a page, for example, to jump from sort of very low sort of experience with having a website to jump into e-commerce land, it's a pretty big step. So we're working with a client right now where we'll walk them sort of slowly in that and make sure that they have what they need to be supported. So let's assume we have a good plan in place. Everyone's going into this with their eyes open. Then the next thing what we do is we create the account with the e-commerce platform of choice. So we tend to build websites, e-commerce websites, I should say, with clients on Shopify. I had mentioned that previously. It's the #1 e-commerce platform in the world. It is generally pretty friendly to get started. I do encourage people to check out the Shopify website. And some people that don't mind rolling up their sleeves and they're a little bit geeky and techy and they have the time to invest in it, I do think you can actually launch your own e-commerce website. There's other platforms like WooCommerce, and both Wix and Weebly have e-commerce plugins. There's larger, more complex stores like Magento and BigCommerce, but we tend to direct people to Shopify. We've built many websites on other platforms, including Richard has completely customized from scratch some e-commerce solutions, for example, with Soul Addiction, which is a local example. So when we help the client to create, to choose a plan on Shopify, Richard, can you maybe just go talk a little bit about choosing a Shopify plan, and then from there, we generally do an initial round of configuration or guide them through that before we take the next step of developing the content.
Yeah, absolutely. So Shopify basically has sort of 3 levels of plans. So they have like a basic sort of entry level. So if you go to shopify.ca/pricing, you'll find a chart there. And it starts at anywhere from US $29 a month, and it goes up to 300 US a month. And the levels, basically, it just depends on kind of how much extra services you want. Most of them actually have the same things, like you can have unlimited number of products and whatnot. One thing they, I'm not actually, I'm not going to go into real big details in the chart here, but some of the key differences are, now you can set up an account with Shopify to get your credit card merchant account. So they basically they tie to your bank account, they take the money and they take their percentage of it. As you go up in the levels, you spend less on that percentage. So your percentage for making a sale goes lower. And then the other big difference is shipping. Actually, with the higher level, you can get a real-time shipping calculator. So that's where for example, if you ship or you have FedEx or UPS, which you kind of pretty much need to if you're going to go into the States usually, it'll actually calculate those fees in real time. So people pay the actual shipping cost for that actual product to their actual location. So you're not overcharging or undercharging them for shipping, and it's kind of fair. You're giving them the fairest shipping price without you losing money. We'll talk about shipping more, but that's kind of a big consideration there. With the higher levels, they do give you a little bit more reporting and whatnot, but I've generally found that for most businesses, especially people that are looking at just setting up something kind of temporary on COVID, for example, the rates that you get charged per transaction aren't really going to affect you that much if you're only selling 5 or a handful of products a month. If you're just kind of trickling through, those will start to add up once you're into hundreds of thousands of dollars of sales. Obviously, 2% versus 2.5, that's going to make a big dent in your bottom line. But when you're small and starting out, I wouldn't use that as your main consideration until you get larger, really. Those are some of the key considerations. They have a pretty easy chart there to go through, but generally speaking, most businesses we find fit into the middle package, that $79 a month one. That's usually got enough features there. And I should also mention Canada Post is built in because this is a Canadian company. Canada Post is built in at all the levels, and it can do shipping quotes from Canada Post. The only time you need to go into the advanced one where you're doing real-time quotes is if you need to ship through FedEx, UPS, or one of the private courier companies. So because Canada Post is kind of built in and works out of the gate, usually that middle package is good. It gives you the right balance of reporting and whatnot. So usually that's where I recommend people start, unless we know they have something really complex off the start, or it is really super simple and we're going to save money.
Sorry to jump over you there, Richard, but at this point, it's really important to note that at this configuration stage, we should be configuring based on the planning options that we had chosen in advance. So some examples of some stumbling blocks here would be like, okay, so we hadn't thought deeply about the products and the levels of categories and categorization. And so an example I like to use is sort of hats. If you're selling hats, you're like, okay, I have lots of different categories of hats, men's hats and women's hats, children's hats, maybe throw that in there. And then for each hat, there might be, for men's hat, there's sports hats, sort of fashion type hats, and then maybe cowboy hats. And then each one, there's going to be sizes, and then each one there might be sort of colors. So you can imagine all these nested sort of categories. And so this would be an example of, depending on which platform you chose, the amount of sort of nesting in hierarchy categories that you would need may or may not be supported by that platform or by that tier the plan that you've chosen. And then you might be things like, okay, well, it's a set price, but if you buy 2, the second one is discounted, or once you get above a certain price, then a discount should be automatically calculated. Well, then you almost have to figure out the math formula of how is that going to be calculated, because then you have to plug that into Shopify so that it just happens automatically. Then you get into this thing where it's like, well, what's the shipping cost? And the easiest thing is free shipping, because there's no calculation that needs to happen. But then you have to probably work that into your margin. So what a lot of people do is the shipping will be calculated automatically, per Richard's points, if you've integrated it with UPS or with Canada Post. But then it gets granular and complicated again there, because it will only be able to calculate that accurately. Because you think of it this way, someone hits a button, I want to buy, and we expect as the owner of this e-commerce store that it just magically calculates the right pricing for shipping to Sarnia, Ontario. How did it do that? Well, it had to know the weight and the general dimensions. So guess what? That's more homework on the front end. When you were building up your SKU list, did you have dimensions and weights? And then what happens if someone's buying 1 versus 10? Of course, the weight and dimensions change of that. And so this is where Shopify no, not Shopify, e-commerce tends to get overwhelming for people that are not quite ready for it. They haven't done the research in the beginning. So there's lots of ways around this. I already alluded to one. Well, in the beginning, let's start with a smaller number of sort of levels. Let's get familiar with this. And in the beginning, free shipping within Alberta, right? And then sometimes it's like anything above that outside of Alberta, flat rate. And the flat rate works maybe if you have similar type products, but if you're selling a small bit of earrings and then a large container of some other thing, and there's such a discrepancy in weights, for example, that flat rate certainly doesn't work. Then there's things like promo codes. Yeah, Richard, jump in.
Well, and another thing you can do is limit the region you sell to. So in a smaller region, like for example, if you ship to all of Alberta, as an example, your shipping rates aren't going to vary that much. But if you ship all the way to the end of Newfoundland, you're going to have some much bigger costs than shipping here to Grand Prairie, for example. So by limiting the regions that you might sell or market to, that can also help control those costs.
Yeah, so let's just say there's lots of configurations that you need to do within the system, which is to say that Shopify is very powerful and it lets you set it up in lots of different ways to support all of the variations of businesses, and is a very, very adaptable platform, which can cause, it's one of those things where, it's like the paradox of choice, so many different ways to set it up, right? But again, if you're willing to do the homework and call Shopify support and talk to a human, they can guide you through, or if you're working like with an agency like Nine10, or there's other local vendors as well that also do e-commerce, then they should be able to guide you through that. Where I wanted to go next is the content. And so this is, that the expression, don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle. So if you have an e-commerce website, you're obviously trying to compel people to buy your products or services. So they should be displayed and sort of merchandised in a way that looks beautiful. So you should have nice photos, you should have nice descriptions, you should have a beautiful welcoming web page. You should maybe consider having a welcome video from the artisan of these special sort of little trinkets that you're selling, whatever it might be. And so in the same way, you would walk into a boutique store, and you imagine walking into Soul Addiction is another perfect example. When you walk into that store, it's beautiful and you just have nothing but options and you're sort of compelled, you're drawn into the product. You need to do the same thing with the website. And so that's an aesthetic thing partly, but it's also, there's a sort of a technical underside to this as well. As if you upload a picture of a shoe and that you took the picture of that on your iPhone or Android, which has an HD camera, you don't have to get too fancy. You can use the tools that you already have in your pocket. The camera will give that a file name, something, a number and a digit .jpeg. But before you upload that to your e-commerce store, you should give that a descriptive file name. Maybe the name of the brand, the type of the shoe, or the type of the purse. Maybe you add some additional information about the name of your store, that type of thing. And then when you actually upload it into the e-commerce platform, there's some additional fields that are available to add extra description, which is viewable by humans, like sort of the product description. But there's some fields that are going to be invisible to the human, but they're there just for search engines. And so this is alt text, for example, which is short for alternative text, which is short for jargon. You don't even have to remember that name. But it's a field that says, hey, Google, I want you to know something about this product, so that if someone's searching for it, Google will have a sense that this website, this e-commerce website, has this product. So if you've ever searched for a product by name or by style, a certain type of jeans, and there's an image that shows up with just that product and you click on it and it brought you to that e-commerce store, well, that website had a much better chance of earning that traffic from Google because it actually had really good detailed information about that product. And do this on your own. Search your own name in Google. And if a picture of you shows up, guess what? Google doesn't really know what you look like in that instance. It's that picture probably has a file name with your name in it. So these things are fairly intuitive, but these are for sure the steps that people always miss. They upload their products with a bunch of generic file names, which does not take the sort of the necessary step to quote unquote optimize your content. And this would be the tip of the iceberg of more technical sort of back end or under the hood optimizations that you'd want to do. So Richard, can you speak to maybe what's the territory where it's like some of these things that, anyone can do this on their own if they just heed our advice and become prepared. But there's also a level of sort of technical optimization and configuration, which is you really should lean towards the professional experts for whether a design or development skill set.
Yeah, so there's a certain amount of this stuff is actually really just kind of common sense, good customer service, and just being helpful, educating the customer. Like, for example, when you're writing a product description, be as detailed and thorough as possible. Provide as much information up front as possible, little bullet lists with features and things that are happening. Those things don't just help your website be found in Google, they actually help a customer. So generally what's good for the customer is also going to be good for Google. So those are kind of the more obvious things. And I know when people think of like SEO, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot, search engine optimization, they think right away, they think code and crazy like tricks and all this other stuff. And the truth is a lot of it actually isn't. And once you wrap your head around the fact that, no, I'm just going to write well, I'm going to spell check, I'm going to, grammatically correct, I'm going to have grammatically correct spell check writing, it's going to be good quality, I'm going to educate the customer and be clear. A lot of that will go a long ways towards because what Google's actually trying to do is to give people what they want. Like, it sounds kind of silly, but it's like if I search for something, it's trying to find the best web page which gives me what I want. So a lot of that is just that's a good quality web page. So a good quality web page has good writing, it has great photos, it has lots of detail, it has information about the product and how the product is made and where it comes from and stuff like that. So that goes a long way. Now, there are some things, for example, is how the website's built under the hood. For example, like if your website's mobile friendly, it squishes down to on a mobile phone and it looks nice and it's still usable and the text isn't tiny and you don't have to zoom and pinch and scroll, your customers are going to have a lot easier time. But that's not something that you're going to easily be able to do because that's code. That's actually, you're going to have to learn how to code to do that. It's not efficient or even remotely like a good use of your time to do that. Your time is worth way more than to try to sit there for hours and days and weeks to become a web designer to figure that stuff out. Hire that stuff out. That's what you call an agency for, those kinds of things. Fortunately, that particular example, like pretty much any e-commerce platform these days that's worth its fee is going to have a mobile version already built in. It's already, most websites are sold that way. Like we don't sell websites that aren't mobile friendly, for example, and most other vendors are the same. So that's kind of just table stakes right now. Yep.
So Richard, I was just going to say, so the mobile friendly example is a good example of a technical best practice that all of the main platforms will just do automatically for you. So that's table stakes. You get that benefit by licensing their services. Yep. But a good example of a technical integration you would definitely want to work with a professional agency on is, okay, so I'm using Shopify, but I also have a POS system in my store to manage the inventory. Mm-hmm. And I want to make those speak together. So when I sell that piece of jewelry in the store, the website knows that I sold it and it updates the amount, the count. Because you don't want to have 10 of these items on the website and 3 of them in the store, and now you're not able to fulfill, and you have to do all these refunds, and there's just a time and hassle. So that integration between what are called third-party platforms, making 2 systems talk together, that's really just a sort of a skill set that a developer will have.
Yeah, that's true. And the truth is that your example there is actually probably the most extreme and most complicated thing that you can do with e-commerce is start integrating your POS into it. Usually that's not an easy process. It's usually a pretty expensive process to do something like that. And for most small businesses just starting out, it doesn't make sense. Now, that being said, Shopify, for example, they sell their own POS system. So if you're starting from scratch and you don't have any system at all yet, it's something to possibly look into because their own system actually integrates with their online store and it's all tied together. Ryan can bring this up here. Yeah, point of sale. So they have and it's like tills and pin pads and like the full thing you'd need in your store, or iPad based and phone based systems too. So they have that kind of stuff. So, and for that reason, a little bit, Shopify is a little harder to integrate with other POS systems because they're trying to push their own. So that's where you get into the territory of probably bigger software. I know like some systems like what was the name of it again? Retail Pro, for example. Like the last time we looked into doing this with Retail Pro, you had to pay Retail Pro $10,000 just to flip that feature on. That's before even doing any of the work. So like that's the kind of costs you're into. So usually, unless you're a pretty big chain and you're managing, say, multiple locations and things like that, it usually doesn't make sense to jump into that unless you can find something like this Shopify where it's already pre-built and it's just a monthly price and it's pretty simple that way. Like they just kind of give it to you off the shelf. Custom doing it yourself is usually something I would avoid. But that is an example of where you would need an agency with quite a lot of skill and a lot of development to do something like that. Like there's a certain level of that too, where even 910 wouldn't do that. That's something where you'd have to go to a much bigger firm somewhere else to work on.
So I'm going to switch gears out of the sort of the technical configuration into some of the things that is more like the enjoyable part about going into e-commerce. The things where it's like, okay, the client, it's maybe the funner stuff, the sexier stuff. So I'm going to bring you right now to Shopify Themes. So one of the things that Shopify has, and this would be true of most e-commerce platforms, is they have these things called, they call them themes, but other platforms call them, templates, things like that. And it's like a starting point. It's an aesthetic layout sort of overview of what your website could look like. So I'll use this example here. Our business partner, Chris, loves plants, and I know that she's sort of always planning on building an online e-commerce store for plants. And so you can see this one here. You're like, okay, so this one would cost $180 to license the theme. And then you can view the demo and you can see how, okay, this is how this is going to look. I see how it's laid out and it's got big, beautiful, bold imagery. And once you license this, there would still be some configurations options on the back end, and you can see what it's going to look like on mobile and on desktop. You, of course, would have to change out these stock fake pictures. These are not your pictures, and you'd have to change them out for your own pictures. And this is an interesting thing. Like with my daughter right now, we're actually developing a Shopify website for fun. And I'm not a designer, I'm not a developer, and we're sort of doing the configuration, we're doing the planning. I have her working on the content. And when we went into theme land, I let her sort of drive, and she ended up choosing a theme that looked like a sort of a bakery, and it had really nice sort of playful colors, and we licensed that theme. And there are free themes, and there are themes that do have a price tag for them, and there's a whole community of designers and developers that make these available through Shopify, and they sell them to you, and that's a business model for them. Now, one of the things with the themes is we will work with the client. Not all themes are created equal. And so the thing about themes is they do a lot of the heavy lifting for the design, or you want a cool animation, or this is the one that puts video first, or this has the coolest grid of how you would interact with the product, or whatever it might be. But then once you license that theme, you're bound by what that theme can and can't do. If you want to change and modify that, you're now into territory where you're like, sorry, that theme doesn't have that function. Yeah, we could do that, but we have to now get a developer to lift up the hood and to make some customizations. And so one of the main thing we do with themes is we vet them. We go back to the planning stage and we make sure we understand the goals of the website. We look at the products and the sort of how they're going to be categorized. We try to understand the general goals of the website, and then we make sure that this theme, not only does it look beautiful, but is it going to cut the mustard in terms of how we want this website to function. So we've certainly discovered themes that look great at first glance, but then they don't cut it when you get to the next step. So the other thing that you can do with Shopify is you can install something called apps. So let me just get here, Shopify apps. And so apps are really this third-party integration where what you do is you can create added more functionality into your Shopify store. So let's just say, for example, you're on, you do email newsletters through MailChimp, and you want people to be able to subscribe to your MailChimp newsletter from your Shopify website. So we would go and search for a MailChimp app. And then we would there we are, MailChimp forms by MailMunch. And you can sort of, if you want to do some cool social media sharing, or maybe you want to add a calendar, or maybe you want to do some customized couponing or promos. And so there's an entire rich ecosystem of apps, which is a glorified way of saying there's lots of cool platforms out there, and wouldn't it be nice if they all talk together? so that when you upload YouTube videos, that they just play nicely over here in Shopify land. That's maybe an example. You don't even need really some deep app integration, but another one would be, we were talking about integrating POS systems. So sometimes there's apps that are made to help make the integration with your POS system and Shopify work smoother. And it's basically that the developers have worked together and they've published their sort of, let's say, language so that everything syncs together nicely. So this is really an active collaboration.
Yeah, and some other common examples are, for example, like discounting schemes. Like Shopify can do some basic discounting, like, buy X number of whatever and get % off, like BOGO and that kind of stuff. But then there's certain discounting schemes where maybe you're like, buy 2 for $49, buy 3 for $79, buy 4 for $199. That actually needs an app to do that. Like that level of detail you can't actually get with just the base Shopify thing. One thing to watch with apps, though, is that just like themes, they're not all built the same either. All the apps on Shopify store, most of them actually, some of them are made by Shopify, most of them are made by third parties, and the quality really varies. Like with some stores, we've had to try 6 different apps before we found one that kind of did what we want, was easy to use, that worked how we thought it was going to work, and wasn't going to be a nightmare to kind of set up and install. So do expect that if you are playing with apps, that you're going to have to try several of them and find one that you like. Most of them have a free trial period. Some of them are just free outright, like you can just use them. A lot of them, though, are paid, and most of them are monthly. So the way they charge is usually monthly, so it might be $15 a month to add that app. So that's something you got to watch. Some of them are actually kind of expensive. Like some of them are $100 a month to add, which actually might cost you more than your Shopify subscription. And you got to watch that because you start stacking those up and they start adding up to a lot of money per month. So usually it's like, budget wise, you'll want to try to limit how much you do there. And some of that goes back to the planning stage of deciding, do I really need this functionality? And also the question of, do I need this functionality right now? Yes, I might need it when I'm a giant conglomerate, sitting with Jeff Bezos at the dinner table. Okay. But right now, when I'm in Grand Prairie and I'm just trying to get through COVID, maybe a simpler solution is actually better. So it's just considerations for the planning that, and sometimes what happens is you make a plan, okay, that's good, we're going to move forward. But once you get through it, you realize there's actually not an app that really works to do the way I wanted to. So you have to jump back to the planning stage and kind of reconfigure things. So there's a lot of back and forth with developing an e-commerce website, and partially because you're depending on other people's work to do it for you, these pre-made things. And like, not all cars are built the same, and neither are all apps or themes. So.
Yeah, and you said less is more there sometimes, the KISS approach of keeping things simple. I want to show some examples of some local e-commerce stores that have been launched recently. These are some clients of ours. And it's going to be a good sort of cross-section of professionally designed versus I rolled up my sleeve and did it on my own. So right now we're looking at Janina's Diamonds in Time, which is a local prominent jewelry store. And we're on their main website. It's a WordPress website. This is a large website, that has, hundreds of pages on it across all of their brands and whatnot. And you can see right here, there's a banner that says the Janina's pop-up shop. Shop Janina's online. So when I click on that, what it does is now it brings me over to, you can see the address on the top went to shop.janinas.com. So now we're actually over on Shopify. So this is a Shopify store that was built in a very quick turnaround time and done by 910. But we had a good plan in place. We did have homework on the sort of side of the client. Janina's had to gather up all of their products in inventory. They had to think about what are the categories: bracelets, necklaces, rings, earrings, watches, and sort of determine what their categories are. And then this is a pop-up shop, so they decided to move forward with the main categories based by price, but you can of course check by brand, etc. as well. And so we help them to create and configure, and then I'm going to sort of jump through some steps, but you can see that this is very beautiful and polished. Well, that's because we had one of a 910's graphic designer create all these beautiful images, and they also had beautiful imagery that they sourced from their vendors, whether it be Tacori or Burks or Janina's or Tissot or whatever. We also went into theme land, and we went and found a beautiful theme that we could take as a starting point, and we did a minimum amount of customization. So this would be an example where an agency like 910 sort of took the lead in the reins, and we did that so we could ensure a polish sort of a level of best practice, some efficiency in getting this out the door very quickly, and to ensure it was completely configured well. And we would have given strong guidance to the Janina's team along the way in terms of their homework. Now, a different example of that would be the headroom. So Danielle at the Headroom is one of our clients, and again, we're right now on her her main website, which is a WordPress website, and you can see here that her online shop is open. And if you click on that, you'll notice that here we are again. We're over onto this new sort of landing page. You can think of it that way, and we're again in Shopify. Now, this one here was completely done by Danielle, and so one of the things that we did with Danielle is we helped set her up some graphics templates in Canva so that she could create some beautiful graphics. But really what she did is, as an entrepreneur, she rolled up her sleeves and she went into Shopify and she followed some tutorials and probably called support a couple times and spoke to some humans. And you can see that this is a fairly beautiful website, but this would have been a lot of work on her end to get this up. So, this is a good example where the main website for the Headroom was developed by us, but in a pinch, adapting to COVID-19, she ended up doing a quick pop-up shop with Shopify. And she actually does have a lot of product in here, but I was speaking with her the other day. She sees some things that are not working perfectly. She would need to make some configuration changes over time, and she'll want to have this evolve and customize it to her specific needs over time. But this was enough to get her started and into e-commerce territory. So this would be a good example of getting started on your own and potentially working with an agency later to do some configurations. Beach Bums is the final example. Is a local tanning salon, and again, we're on their main website, and you can see Tan at Home. If you click on this, it brings you over to the Shopify store. Now you can see this one is less polished, but it's also, I was speaking with Ronnie, and she's figuring it on her own. She jumped into Shopify land and she did what she could to get it started. And there's lots of things that she would like to see improved, and those improvements can be she can have this evolve over time, and she may choose to work with a professional agency like us or not. But you can see that there's a level of polish difference on the front end, but certainly on the back end, there's some challenges in terms of configuration and how is the tax charged and what about the shipping and all these types of things. So what I'd like to sort of leave it with is that someone looking to jump into e-commerce should explore the full range of, I'm going to work with a professional agency, or I'm going to get scrappy and roll up my sleeves and do it all on my own. More commonly, what we find is somewhere in the middle, where we take the lead on some of the initial configuration and some of the design, but we do give a good list of homework for our clients to help keep the cost down. There's some of the heavy lifting that they can do on their end, which is typically the front loaded in the planning phase. So I'm going to skip through the test and assume that we launch, which is to say Richard hits some buttons on the back end and boom, it's now live onto the world. And the reality is, once the website launches, that doesn't mean people are going to visit. So then it goes to the activation or the promotion strategy, which, there's so many different ways to do this. It's send out an email to your customers, let them know that you're now selling online. Are there any incentives or promotions? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have a Twitter account? Are you on LinkedIn? Post about it that way. Put a link to it in your email signature. Update your business card and have that on there. Reach out and collaborate amongst your peer group of local businesses and help them promote it. So really, it's tell the world that you are now online and selling, and draw that traffic inwards. So Tom, maybe that's a sort of a good time to pivot over to questions. Maybe Richard has something to add here.
Hey, Richard, go ahead. Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to jump back. It just, what Ryan was talking about just triggered some things, actually jumping back into the planning phase. So one of the things, and this actually has a relation to activation and promotion. So first of all, when you open a brick and mortar store, you lease a space somewhere, you almost, depending on the location, you almost have automatic advertising. Like if you're downtown, like in one of the buildings downtown, you have traffic driving by, and they'll see your signage. Maybe there's a tree in front of it, I don't know. But generally they'll see your signage and you're going to get promotion that way. You're just going to get foot traffic. People walk by, they look in your windows, oh, that's cool, let's go check it out. You just kind of randomly get some traffic. The problem with the internet is that doesn't happen, because so you have to end up showing up in Google, but also possibly advertising your store. So showing up in Google, you're probably going to you might show up for some local searches and whatnot, but how do you show up in, say, Manitoba or something like that? So that's where it becomes a lot more complicated, and that's why they just won't come unless you do something. But I think the other biggest thing, though, is that if you open a store here in Grand Prairie, get a retail store, then generally you're competing mostly against possibly the other stores like you in that area, and then in Grand Prairie in general. But somebody isn't going to drive to Manitoba just to not shop with you necessarily, unless they carry something that they just can't find anywhere except for Manitoba and they have to get it. Obviously, they'll probably order it online. But what I'm saying is, online, the biggest challenge you're going to have with marketing is the competition. Because you're not just competing with Grand Prairie anymore, you're competing with the world. You're competing with Amazon, which has, for all intents and purposes, unlimited pockets, unlimited deep pockets kind of thing, and eBay, and. So that's the biggest challenge. So I would say in the planning stage, what you really need to think about is, what can you sell that's unique or different that you can't get anywhere else? Because those are going to be your best chance of having somebody buy your stuff. So for example, let's say you own a gift store and you have a whole bunch of the, those funny gift items or whatever, you have a whole bunch of those and stuff. Well, so do a lot of other gift stores. Pretty much every, knick-knack store you find has a line of those. Even like Kohl's has stuff like that. You're probably not going to do very well selling those, because it's just, I can get it on Amazon. Amazon can price it way better than you, because they buy in volume. They have buying power like you wouldn't believe. So are you going to be able to compete as a local business, with a 30 or 40% margin above what those guys can sell it for? Probably not. But let's say you have a line of local jewelry made by a local artist, and that's a unique, one-of-a-kind product that you can't get anywhere else. That stuff makes sense, because now that's something I know that I can't find anywhere else. Or maybe it's a certain line of products that you make, or you manufacture, or you've sourced, or maybe that are hard to find somewhere else. Those are the things where you're going to have kind of the advantage. The other consideration there too is your easiest sales, especially if this is like a COVID strategy, if you're doing this like for example, like the headroom to open up and have some business during this sort of like lockdown, is like your easiest sales are going to be your existing local customers. So the people that already know you, they already trust you, they maybe been in your store, been in your shop. Those are the first people to reach out to. So that might be sending them all a mass email. If you have an email list, it might be picking up the phone and calling them, it might be just letting them know that, hey, we're doing this, so you can still kind of support us or find what you need from us and whatnot. So that's your low-hanging fruit. Those are going to be the easier sales. So you will get some sales from that. And with those, it's less important that you don't have to be as niche with your products necessarily, as long as, there's, not some other super easy or cheaper way for them to get that. But there is a certain degree where they'll support you over somebody else, even if you are a little bit more, because, support local, right? Like that's what we're supposed to do here. We all support each other. But as that region grows, the competition gets bigger, and it also gets tougher to market to, right? So just generally in Grand Prairie and Peace region, you'll find the marketing is a lot easier than, say, marketing across Canada over to Toronto, where you have like thousands of stores that are probably competing for the same space as you, and probably have more resources and money because they're funded by big corporations. So that's just a consideration, is to look at what kind of can make you stand out and what makes you different. Like, and with Janina's, for example, that's actually a good example, because technically jewelry is a very crowded space online, and it's hard to compete against that. And I mean, they sell big brands that a lot of other jewelry stores do, but their primary strategy was actually for the local market. And it was to basically go after the local customers and say, hey, you know what, we can still let you do some of these things. Like, people still want to give gifts or make somebody feel special, or maybe propose to somebody. But obviously if they can't go in the store because it's closed, this lets them do that. So it's kind of like that's kind of the strategic thinking. You're going to have to put a lot of thought into it first. And if you do that right, you're going to have a way bigger chance of success than just saying, I'm going to open another t-shirt shop, which there's millions of those, and there's some really big ones out there, and it's going to be a real uphill battle to try to market that and sell it and to make it to make your money back on it, really. So
Richard, I want to jump in there and transfer it over to Tanya or Tom. I just want to look at the clock as well and make sure we leave some time for some questions and discussions. There was a question I just saw come in from Ricardo from ATB. If you have a third-party POS system, how do you suggest a small business to manage its inventory to start with? So this is the idea that the business already has a POS system where they manage their inventory. And it's basically the question is, can you and how would you sync that to Shopify? And the reality is that maybe you can, maybe you can't, depending on the POS system, whether or not it's ready to talk nicely to Shopify.
Yeah. There's a few strategies you can use. There's some simple things you can do. So first of all is you set aside a certain part of your inventory just for online sales. So say you have 5 widgets, you set aside 2 of them for online sales or 1 or whatever. And that's the quantity that you put into Shopify. So you're kind of manually doing that because the biggest risk is if you don't sync that inventory, and again, this is outside of COVID, somebody comes in and buys the same product off the counter that you just sold online. Now, one of these customers is going to be really mad at you because they're not going to get their product, and it's probably going to be the online person because you've already handed it over to the other person. So that's one way to do it, is to have a separate inventory just for online. Another way to manage it is it depends on your products and service, but some companies can do kind of just-in-time ordering, like in the sense that the manufacturer can get them the product. So the customer orders from you, you actually order from your supplier. That comes really quickly, and then you get that out to your customer. So in that scenario, you kind of have an unlimited supply, quote unquote, based on whatever the warehouse has near you. The biggest thing with that is you're going to have delays with shipping and stuff, right? Because now it has to get to you and then it has to get to them. Now, if the manufacturer runs out, then you get into a back order situation, which could delay it for months possibly. So that's where your risks are there. And then, of course, another situation or another scenario is just to manually sync that. So when you get a sale on Shopify, you get an email saying, hey, this customer bought this. You go into Shopify, look that up, and then you go into your POS system and manually key in that product's been sold, and you take it out of inventory and record it. There's a lot of work there.
Sorry, I didn't talk over you there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in here and share a comment from the Chris King. From the county, who just dropped in the comments. And actually, let's try to keep our answers short here because I want to make sure that Tom can grab some questions as well. But Chris mentioned some suppliers will drop ship as well as direct to customers. So this is a strategy where if you have drop shipping partners, you don't have to hold inventory. You don't have to have that that physical inventory. So the idea is you place the order on the e-commerce, and then that triggers an order through your dropship partner, who will then drop ship it as well. So that's another type of strategy that allows people to sort of deal with the inventory, the physical inventory challenges, which this is quasi unique to e-commerce.
Yeah, and actually expanding on that, there are actually fulfillment companies that they specialize, like basically you send them your products, they handle everything. They pack, they ship, they deliver, they handle the kind of the customer service and whatnot for that shipment. And then you just pay them, or they take a percentage of your sales or whatever. So that's another expansion on that. All I wanted to say is basically which strategy you pick might depend on the type of your inventory. Again, if you have one-of-a-kind jewelry, then you're probably going to have to do the manual sync. But I'm going to say is everybody wants to just over optimize and over automate right off the start. Like you start thinking like I'm going to be Amazon from day one. You don't need to. Here's the thing with if you're just starting to sell online, it's just COVID-19, you're not going to get a rush of sales right off the bat. You're not going to get 10,000 sales overnight and then have this big nightmare to manage. You might get 1 or 2 sales in your first month if you're lucky. So depending on what it is, it might be better, but that being said, like a handful of sales is not that hard to key into another system. So, you or your staff members help you with that and do it. So I would say, again, that simpler is better.
Tom or Tanya, or I guess anyone else on the call, are there any sort of questions about the tech or about the planning or about how to promote it on Facebook afterwards or whatever?
Well, you in the notes that you sent, Ryan, there were a couple of terms here that I don't think you've touched on that are kind of curious to me about cart abandonment and fulfillment.
Yes.
So if you want to try and explain those to the group.
Sure. So cart abandonment what that is that's the habit that everyone has, where they go online, they click a few products, they add it to the shopping cart, and then they get to the payment screen, and then they get distracted by their kid, or they see the price, or they're like, I'll come back later, and they leave. They abandon the cart before the transaction. So that's disappointing for the retailer. You were like, ooh, so close. So there's some great tools built into these platforms that are called cart abandonment strategies. And long and short, what it does is it depending on how this is set up, ads can then be retargeted back to you. So later on, when you're on a website and you're just fooling around, you're like, oh my goodness, that's the product that I had started to buy, but I didn't get to. And it's just floating there as an ad. And it's like, come finish this. We'll offer an extra 10, 15% off for you to get to the finish line. And these ads are sort of tracking you, and they're doing it anonymously, sort of via like a tracking code. But then there's also another way to do it, where if in the process of getting started, your email was shared, then the system can actually email the person like, hey, are you still interested in this product? Why not sort of take it to the finish line again? And you can imagine different words. So it's the idea of using software and systems to go back out to the person and offer them an incentive to come back and complete the purchase. So that's cart abandonment. Okay. Fulfillment is once someone places the order, what happens? And so for most e-commerce, when they're getting started, it's like, I placed an order on Monday, but then the store is like, well, the staff member that deals with the e-commerce, she only comes in on every Wednesday. So Monday and Tuesday went by, and it wasn't until Wednesday until someone saw that, oh, there was an online order, and now I got to go get the box and put it in a wrapping and tape it up and maybe wrap it in a nice present and then get it off into say, Canada Post or something like that. So fulfillment just really means fulfilling the order. And this is actually quite complex, and it's something that has to happen in the real world. And depending on how sophisticated you are, you may actually be set up from a process perspective to do this efficiently. But this is one of the sort of, a lot of people just assume magically, I will take an order on the internet and somehow the person will get the product. But no, you have to fulfill that. And so for stores to do e-commerce properly and at scale, you should have someone who's an employed staff who has the core responsibility of, I'm in charge of this e-commerce. And depending on how big your e-commerce part of your business is, that might be the only thing that they do. They don't deal with the physical customers. They may not even ever come into the store unless, you would say, well, what's also on their plate? Are they also in charge of marketing and promoting on Facebook and on Pinterest and on maybe advanced sort of ad campaigns with search engine ads? And are they taking the photos and the videos? So marketing and promoting and fulfilling the orders with e-commerce is a big job. Maybe it's not the biggest job if you're just getting started and you're getting 2 orders per week. But if you're only getting 2 orders per week, is that enough to really justify the initial investment? Even if you are rolling up your sleeves and doing most of the work, that's an entrepreneur's time, and your time is valuable. So there's a minimum scale, let's say, of e-commerce. So you should do it right and have a good intention to have a good amount of products in there and to really activate and promote it and be ready to fulfill it in a timely manner.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, e-commerce really, to make a store successful, is a marathon, not a sprint. You know what? It is another business. It's like starting another business. It's like opening a second store. You have to get people to know where that is, and you know what? It's just going to take time. So do expect it to take longer than you think.
It's like thinking of it as another division of your company. Maybe would be a good way to think about it. So, what else, Tom?
I was just going to say, it sounds like research and patience are 2 of the things to keep in mind as as you're going into the e-commerce thing. It's sounds like you need to do your homework, and then it's like a plant. Sometimes you got to let it grow a little bit before you give up on it. So there is a question.
Tom, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Barry.
I think that with a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this business idea, and of course they think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But 2 things jumped out at me when you were talking. The first thing was the testing component, and the other thing that came out of it was the Kevin Costner, not necessarily if you build it, they will come. My question is, is that is there a way to satisfy the testing and whatnot through some kind of a prototype or something to start with that will be not as expensive, but might get the idea out that if this idea is even going to fly?
Yeah, so if you're using a major platform like Shopify, you can sort of assume that you don't need to test the infrastructure. Their system will work. It's more testing your internal processes on, say, the fulfillment side. It is also testing to make sure that the right price was calculated when you did the shipping and you forgot to, you put 100 pounds as opposed to 10 pounds. Oops, that was a mistake. So you'd want to test that way. But most of these also, platforms have a free trial. So you can do a soft launch. So for example, my daughter, we're making Addie's Amazing Cupcakes and we're going to sell online. And when we test it, we're going to test it to family and friends and cousins, and they're going to place some real orders. And I'll transact through 5 orders while using the free trial. And then in this case, for my daughter, we're not going to scale this up into a large business, or maybe we will. But before we ever launch publicly, if we were to do that, we'd make sure that we've processed a few orders with some trusted customers, where if we mess it up, guess what? No one's going to worry, and we're going to make it right on the back end as well. So Richard, you have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, so, and actually, you know what, you can even go simpler than that. Like even before Shopify, for example, is try to offer some of your products through Facebook. For example, make a Facebook post and say, hey, we're taking some online orders. Like for example, Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory right now is kind of doing that. They have a post every week where they put up some featured products and whatnot, and then basically you message them through Facebook, or you call the number or text them or whatever, and you say, hey, I want to order this, and then they arrange delivery to your place. That's probably a great way to start, because then you don't have any setup, but that's a way to just test, would my customers buy this stuff from me if they can't feel it, touch it, come into a store? Is this stuff going to sell online? Because honestly, if your product won't sell there, it probably won't sell on Shopify either. Like, no amount of technology is going to solve that for you or make it any better. So I do think there are simpler ways to do that. And for example, like posting it to Facebook or social media and offering it there, and just doing a very manual process is going to take a lot more of your time. But that being said, it's actually valuable time, because you can connect with your customers as you do that and learn about their needs and also get their feedback. So feedback is a big thing too, is when, especially in that early phase, is try to get feedback. Like maybe call some of the customers or email them after the sale and just say, hey, was it what you expected? Could we do anything better? Is there anything different? Do you have suggestions? Maybe having a feedback form on your website might be another way to do that. A personal approach, I think, when starting out is probably even better. Just, talk to your customers kind of thing,
Yeah,
right?
that's a really good example. Another local company doing this is Mad Hatters. Richard, I know you and Chris recently just bought a freezer pack of meat, local meat. And that was done through, Derek Moe was like, fire me an email or send me a direct message on Facebook, and we'll connect with you in some manual process over the phone. We'll get your credit card, and we'll deliver it to you. Now, there's low tech on that. So in this case, what you're doing is you're testing the market. You're not testing the infrastructure of the e-commerce system. But once you get to a point where like, wow, there's a lot of interest for people that want to buy our support local and get some local meat in these freezer packs, or, and they include maybe some fresh vegetables and some recipes, all this sort of thing. Then all of a sudden they're like, we have a demand now where it's time to invest in the infrastructure. Then all of a sudden those customers that are used to doing it in sort of a low key way, where they're like, wow, there's now a dedicated website where I can go and browse, and a more sophisticated way to do this, right? So that's a really good example. Jeffries is doing some really cool stuff with their charcuterie boards and their meals as well. Ramona's just recently did it where now they're just selling pizza boxes with all the ingredients in there and a nice sort of list of sort of how to cook the pizza. And that's brilliant. Like it's not that brilliant. It's not even that novel. It's a nice evolution. People love Ramona's pizza. And now with COVID-19, I'm looking for things to do with my kids. Why wouldn't I want to make some pizzas? You don't need a fancy e-commerce engine to do any of that. What you need to do is test your market, build some hype, get a couple early customers, and then you can say, this makes sense. Let's do an e-commerce store. So maybe that's a really good sort of bit of advice. Don't focus on the technology. Focus on whether or not people are willing to buy your product in service in this online environment, and don't even worry about the technology out of the gate.
Yeah, and I mean, And yeah, and if you can sell that through Facebook, that's also an opportunity to test some of that fulfillment and that back end stuff. Now you're like, okay, I have to put this into inventory or take it out of inventory and I have to ship it. So you can also figure some of that process out, maybe document it, maybe train some employees on it. And then once that gets going, when you open your store, you're going to be a lot more prepared.
Are there any absolutely do not do when it comes to e-commerce? Like, are there things that it's like absolute red flags, like don't even go down that road?
Oh, there's probably so many of them. What are some of the ones that we don't come unprepared? I mean, that maybe sounds obvious, but it's the number one thing that we encounter. Don't have unfair expectations that is you can wave this magic wand and like be ready to. Don't come in not ready to invest resources, both time and energy and money to promote, because if you're not paying to promote, at some point you're going to have a limited audience and you're going to be selling less to people. Richard, what are some sort of don'ts you can think of?
I would say something, and it's actually as much of a don't as it is a you do. Here's the thing about e-commerce that people hate is the shipping. And because e-commerce is everything that it is about going into a store and picking a product off the shelf and buying it, except I don't get it right now. We are in a now society. I want everything now. It's instant gratification, everything. And that's why people hate shipping, because you have to wait to get your product. It's like the Christmas wait. It's like, why, So obviously, so what I would say is that applies to everything with e-commerce. So if somebody emails you for support and a question, don't wait a week to reply to them. You have to be on it. And the problem with e-commerce sometimes that people don't realize is customers' timeline is not necessarily your timeline. They might email you. If you're shipping overseas, they email you at 2 a.m. and their timeline is an hour from 2 a.m. How do you handle that? That's a consideration if you're shipping international, for example. So you have to think about those things too. But generally speaking, the faster you can get something out of the door to the customer, the better. The other thing I will say, and this is more of a do, like a definite do, is free shipping works really well. And there's been studies and they found that people will take free shipping over a 10% discount on the product, even if the 10% discount saved them more money. And the reason is free shipping eliminates that feeling that not only is it inconvenient that I have to wait to get this thing, they're making me pay for it. Like, it's like I'm being tortured and slapped just for shopping, So free shipping is something that's definitely, if you can do it in some situations, do it and do that over a discount. So instead of doing a BOGO, do free shipping. So that's kind of more of a do situation, but the don'ts are really like your customer service. If you think it has to be on point on site and in your store, it's going to have to kind of be double on point online because people are not patient. They will go somewhere else because a big thing with online shopping is trust. So people have to trust you. So for example, if you don't publish your your address of your company on your website, if you hide contact information, that's a no-no. Don't do that. So don't not publish contact information. People need to know that you're a real company, you're established, you're there to help, they can find you somehow. Because if they order online and then they don't get your product or they don't get their product that they ordered and you do the warehouse full of empty boxes scam on them type thing, well, they want, at least with an address, even if they can't do anything about it really at the end of the day, the fact is if they see an address and a phone number, they have something they can choke for a little while or at least feel like they can choke. So it's things like that. Don't ever set up a website that isn't secured, that isn't like HTTPS. And I mean, if you're using any big platform, they will have that, so you don't have to worry about it most of the time. But if you're doing some custom build or, getting a student to set up your website for you to do online transactions. The other thing I would say is don't build and host your own actual payment system. Like where it's built into your website, like use a third party whenever you can, because with all the security and hacking and stuff that's happened these days, there's a lot of liability on you. If you host that and you have a database of don't put credit card information in your office, on your servers, on your computers kind of thing on the website, because if that gets hacked, you can actually be liable for all the chargebacks. The credit card company will actually come after you for it. And that could be a nightmare. That could actually shut down your merchant account. So definitely don't do that. Let somebody else handle that. So Shopify provides a platform, direct customers there, they do that. And if something screws up and Shopify gets hacked, impact, it's not as much of a liability to you. I don't know if you're ever completely free, you know, from that chain of stuff, but it's a lot better if somebody else can do it. So, or if you're selling stuff on your website, for example, like online invoice payments or something, we always say direct to the bank's online payment form, like Moneris or whatever. They provide forms that they host, they maintain, they run, and they secure. Link to those and then bring them back to your website when the transaction's done. Don't try to put that on your website directly, because yeah, that's where you're going to run into trouble. So that's two things off the top of my head anyway.
Yeah, and so like these are maybe sort of some of the things, the don'ts, and for some people this might be the stuff that causes anxiety and gives reasons to not jump into e-commerce. But when done properly with a good plan in place and an investment of resources and potentially money to promote and activate, and maybe you'll reach out to a professional service provider like Nine10 or one of the other local ones. E-commerce helps you to grow your geographic region, and it allows you to develop sort of two business divisions: the physical bricks and mortar, which might have products and services that sell in the geographic region, which might end up being different and complementary to the ones that are selling in the online extended sort of geographic region of, say, all of Western Canada. And it allows you to sort of diversify, and it allows you to sort of take the step into digital land. And then, you know, for a lot of people, they're looking for what's their mid to long-term goal of, I don't want to be stuck to a physical location, having to go into the store every day. And there's a lot of stores that have started as bricks and mortar, have adopted to e-commerce, where they ran both bricks and mortar and e-commerce at the same time. And then they sort of, over time, got rid of their bricks and mortar, and now they're just an online retailer store. And then guess what? Then they are connected to that sort of business through the internet, whether they're in Cancun or Grand Prairie or Victoria or, you know, Snowbird or whatever. So again, there's lots of opportunity for businesses who don't. So although we had been alluding to in COVID-19, some businesses are quickly trying to build a bridge into e-commerce. If it doesn't make sense for your business to be on e-commerce in the long term, I would probably recommend against trying to quickly throw things together to get into e-commerce for the next month to help bridge through COVID-19. There's too much work, there's too much risk, there's too much investment of your time and your resources to do that. But if you do believe that your products or services are well suited for online commerce in the mid to long term, there's never a better time to start looking at that. And again, even if you were to just take the time to research right now and up your knowledge level so you can make it an informed decision, maybe you'll determine that, you know what, we're not ready for e-commerce, or it's not a good fit for us, or that isn't in our long-term goal. But now is the right time to think about that. And there's plenty of local providers like Nine10 that are willing to sort of have that consultation with you at no charge. And we don't have an expectation that you're going to do the e-commerce store with us. I might encourage you to go do it on your own. And once it's built, maybe we can help you with the promotion, the paid advertising on search engines or social media. But even again there, I'd probably encourage you to, why don't you hire us to train you first so you can do some of that internal. So we do try to empower our local entrepreneurs to do more of on their own sort of in-house.
And it's handy to have a couple of dogs that let you know when something you bought through e-commerce comes to your door too. So, well, I think we'll leave it at there, being respectful of everybody's time, and we want to. I mean, as much as nice a drive it is to go to Manitoba, it's nice to be able to shop locally more than anything else. But guys did a great job. Thank you, Ryan and Richard, and thank you everyone for joining us. Some great things. I know a couple of the comments here, it's lots to think about, and I think that's the thing. You've started a conversation with people, and again, we'll share this video and start some more conversations out there. It's great food for thought, and really appreciate what you guys do in the community and for business. So thank you so much. We'd like to remind everyone that our next webinar will be next Friday. And again, it'll be Kari Speaker-Smith and the team from Fletcher Mudrick providing some answers to some frequently asked questions right now by a number of businesses. So I hope everyone has a good day, a great weekend, and we will talk to you all soon. Thanks for participating. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
See you later.